December 7, 1958. A Sunday morning so cold it felt like the air itself had teeth. Portland, Oregon was wrapped in a thick, gray mist, the kind that clung to your skin and made every breath feel heavy. The Martin family, Kenneth, Barbara, and their 3 daughters, Barbie, Virginia, and Susan, had no idea that this would be the last morning they'd ever spend together. They were just a family. A normal, happy family. Kenneth, a quiet but kind man, worked at the local lumber mill. Barbara was the kind of mother who always had cookies in the oven, who sang along to the radio while doing dishes. The girls, bright-eyed, full of laughter, were looking forward to Christmas. That morning, they piled into their red and white 1956 Ford sedan, heading toward the Columbia River Gorge to gather evergreen branches for holiday decorations. It was a tradition. A simple, wholesome outing. But something was wrong. I don't mean in some obvious, dramatic way. It was the little things. The radio crackled between songs, a weatherman warning of strong currents along the Columbia, dangerous conditions, before fading into static. At a gas station just outside Portland, the attendant, a grizzled old man named Ed, would later tell police that Barbara Martin had seemed off. Not scared exactly, just distracted, like she was listening to something no one else could hear. And then there was the way Kenneth hesitated before pulling back onto the road. Just for a second. Just long enough to glance in the rearview mirror, as if something was following them. The Columbia River Gorge is beautiful. And by beautiful, I mean it's the kind of place that makes your skin crawl when you're there alone. Towering basalt cliffs, black and jagged, like the ribs of some long-dead beast. The river below, wide and merciless, churning with icy currents. The forests, so thick they swallow sound whole. The Martins stopped at a diner in Hood River. A waitress remembered them. Virginia had ordered hot chocolate. Susan had giggled over a comic book. Nothing unusual. But then, the timeline gets fuzzy. A trucker swore he saw their car parked near a remote overlook, engine still running, doors open. A hiker claimed he heard shouting, a man's voice, furious, then a woman pleading. And then there was the stranger. A mechanic in Cascade Locks reported seeing a man in a red Ford tailing the Martins' car. Not speeding. Not honking. Just following. When questioned, the mechanic shuddered. He didn't look right. His face was too still. By dusk, the Martins should have been home. They never made it back. The police found nothing. No car. No bodies. No signs of a crash. Just silence. Then, a week later, a hunter stumbled upon a single set of footprints in the snow near a cliff's edge. Small. A child's maybe. They led right up to the drop-off, then vanished as if whoever made them had simply stepped into thin air. Search parties combed the gorge. Divers braved the river's deadly currents. Nothing. But some of the searchers came back with stories. One man swore he heard whispering in the trees, "Help us." Clear as day. When he turned, there was no one there. Another claimed he saw a red car submerged in the shallows just for a second. When he returned with help, gone. Like it had never been there at all. May 1959. 5 months later. 2 fishermen near the Dalles spotted something pale bobbing in the water. Virginia and Susan Martin. Their small bodies were battered, bloated from months in the river. Virginia had a deep gash on her skull, not the kind of wound the current could have made. And their clothes? Still neatly buttoned. As if they'd been placed in the water. The rest of the family was never found. Theories? There are plenty. Maybe Kenneth lost control of the car. Maybe they plunged into the river and only the girls washed ashore. But then why no wreckage? No skid marks? Others whisper about the man in the red Ford. A suspect? A predator? Then there are the darker stories. Locals talk about an old lodge deep in the gorge. A place where people used to gather for rituals back in the 20s. A place where, even now, hikers report seeing shadows moving in the windows. And then there's the photo. A damaged roll of film was found near the riverbank years later. Only one image was salvageable, a blurry snapshot of the Martin family smiling. But in the background, just barely visible, something was standing behind them. Even now, people swear the gorge is wrong. In 1993, a hiker found a child's sweater tucked between the rocks. It smelled like wet earth and something metallic. In 2012, campers reported hearing giggling in the trees, high-pitched, playful. Then a man's voice, guttural, snarling, "Too late." And sometimes, on the coldest winter nights, if you stand near the cliffs and listen very carefully, you can still hear a car engine, idling, waiting. The case was closed. The files were archived. But the Martins didn't just disappear. Something took them. Something that didn't want them found. And if you ever drive through the Columbia River Gorge at night, if you see a flash of red in your rearview mirror, don't stop. Because the gorge remembers. And it's always hungry for more. This next story is so eerie it will make your skin crawl. Let's get into it. December 24, 1945. Fayetteville, West Virginia. Snow drifted down like feathers from a torn pillow, settling on rooftops, fences, and the quiet streets of a town dreaming of Christmas morning. Inside the Sodder family farmhouse, warmth glowed in every corner, wood crackling in the fireplace, children laughing as they tucked last-minute presents beneath the tree. George Sodder, a hard-working Italian immigrant, sat in his favorite chair, smoking a pipe. His wife, Jenny, hummed softly as she wrapped gifts. Their 10 children, ranging from toddlers to teenagers, buzzed with excitement. The youngest, Betty, just 5 years old, clung to her sister Jenny's skirt, giggling as she tried to peek at the presents. It was a perfect Christmas Eve, until the fire. Just past midnight, a scream tore through the house. "Papa. The roof, it's burning." George bolted upright. Smoke curled from the basement, thick and black, slithering up the walls like something alive. Within minutes, flames devoured the house, roaring like a beast starved for flesh. George and Jenny scrambled, grabbing children, shoving them out windows, screaming names into the inferno. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty. But 5 of their children never answered. And when the fire burned itself out, there was nothing left. No bodies, no bones, just ashes and silence. The fire department didn't arrive until dawn. By then, the house was a skeleton of blackened timber. George stumbled through the wreckage, hands raw from digging, voice hoarse from screaming. But he noticed something wrong. The ladder he always kept propped against the house, gone. The telephone line, dead. Not burned, cut. His trucks, which had worked perfectly the day before, wouldn't start. And the fire, it burned too hot, too fast. The sheriff told him, the children perished. Their bones were consumed. But George knew fire. He knew cremation took hours. Even then, fragments remained. So where were his children's teeth? Their belt buckles? Anything? There was nothing. As if they had never been there at all. Then the whispers started. A telephone repairman confirmed it. The line had been severed with wire cutters. A neighbor swore she saw 5 children peering from a dark car that night, their faces pale behind the glass. A waitress in a nearby town served breakfast to 5 quiet, dark-haired kids the next morning. When she asked their names, the oldest boy hesitated, then whispered, "We're not supposed to talk." And then there was the insurance salesman. 2 weeks before the fire, he had knocked on the Sodder's door, grinning. What would you do if this house burned down with your children inside? George had thrown him off the property. Now he wondered, was that a threat? George and Jenny refused to believe their children were dead. They plastered their car with missing posters. They hired private investigators. And then they erected a massive billboard on Route 16, staring down every passing driver with a single damning question. What was the fate of our children? For 40 years it stood. A monument to grief. A challenge to the world. Then in the 1960s a letter arrived. Inside, a photograph of a young man in his 20s. Jenny gasped. Louis. Scrawled on the back. I love brother Frankie. Boys, A90132. But when they tracked the address, the trail went cold. The man in the photo vanished. What really happened? Theories turned to terror. Theories festered like rot beneath the town's skin. Theory 1. The fire was a cover-up. George had been vocal against Mussolini. Had someone taken revenge? Rumors swirled of a local family with mafia ties. Men who could make a house disappear. Theory 2, the children were stolen. Human traffickers. A black market adoption ring. Some said the kids were raised under new names, their memories rewritten. Theory 3, something older than crime. An old man in the hills whispered that the Sodder land was cursed. Fire don't just burn wood, he muttered. It cleans what can't be spoken. Had something taken the children? Something that left no bones behind? Jenny wore black for the rest of her life. George dug through animal bones, searching for fragments of his children. Every Christmas, the surviving Sodder siblings set 5 extra places at the table. And sometimes, on winter nights, neighbors swore they heard laughter in the wind. Children's voices calling from the dark. The case was closed. The house was gone. The parents died without answers. But the mystery? It still burns. Because the truth is this: 5 children vanished without a trace. No bodies. No closure. Just a billboard that stood for decades, screaming into the void. And maybe, just maybe, if you listen closely on a cold Christmas Eve in Fayetteville, you can still hear them, waiting to be found. The fear is only beginning. Hold tight as we dive into another horrifying experience. May 8, 1938. Mother's Day. McKean County, Pennsylvania. The morning sun filtered through stained glass windows, painting the church in warm hues of gold and red. Families sat shoulder to shoulder in the pews, fanning themselves with hymnals as the preacher's voice rose and fell like the surrounding Allegheny Hills. In the third row, 4-year-old Marjorie West fidgeted beside her older sister, Dorothea. She wore a crisp white dress, her fiery red curls tied back with a ribbon, a gift for her mother, Cecilia. When the final hymn ended, Marjorie clapped her small hands together, grinning up at her parents. "Can we go to the woods, Mama? Please?" Cecilia smoothed her daughter's hair. Just for a little while. No one knew it would be the last time they'd ever see Marjorie smile. The meadow was idyllic, wildflowers swaying in the breeze, the distant murmur of a creek, sunlight dappling the grass. Shirley West, Marjorie's father, unpacked the picnic basket while Cecilia tended to Dorothea. Marjorie skipped ahead, her small hands plucking daisies. "I'm making a crown for you, Mama," she called. Shirley walked back to the car to retrieve a blanket. Cecilia turned to help Dorothea with her shoes. A gust of wind rustled the trees. When they looked up, Marjorie was gone. Not a scream. Not a rustle. Not a single footprint in the soft earth. Just an empty patch of grass where a little girl had been standing seconds before. Within minutes, the woods erupted with shouts. "Marjorie!" Hundreds of townspeople combed the forest. Boy Scouts, police, bloodhounds. Even planes buzzed overhead, scanning the dense canopy. But the woods gave up nothing. No torn fabric. No tiny shoe. Not even her white ribbon. Cecilia collapsed, clutching Marjorie's unfinished daisy chain. Shirley's voice broke as he screamed his daughter's name into the trees. Then, as night fell, the whispers began. Did she fall into an abandoned mine shaft? Was there a bear? A wolf? Or had someone been watching from the shadows? The search lasted weeks, months, years. But some of the searchers came back with stories. One man swore he heard a child humming "Jesus Loves Me" deep in the woods at dusk. When he followed the sound, it stopped, as if someone had covered her mouth. A local boy found a porcelain doll half buried in the mud. Its scalp had been ripped open and stuffed with human hair. Red hair. And then there was the old woman. A farmer's wife claimed an elderly woman in a tattered black dress had been seen lingering near the church that morning. She didn't blink, the farmer's wife whispered. Just stared at the children, like she was picking one. The Wests moved away, haunted by dreams of their lost girl. Cecilia once woke screaming, certain she'd heard Marjorie whisper, "I'm here, Mama," but they won't let me leave. The church crumbled. The meadow grew wild. But teenagers still dared each other to walk Marjorie's path. In 1962, a girl named Linda sprinted back to town, her face streaked with tears. "I saw her," she gasped. Marjorie. Standing between the trees. She was smiling. But her eyes were wrong. Theories and fear. Theory 1. The woods took her. Maybe she fell. Maybe an animal dragged her away. But why no bones? No scraps of clothing? Theory 2. A stranger's hands. A traveling salesman was spotted near the picnic site. Years later, a man arrested for abducting a girl in Ohio confessed to being in McKean County that day. But I didn't take no redhead, he sneered. Theory 3. Something older than crime. In 1978, hikers found a collapsed cabin deep in the Alleghenies. Scratched into the hearth, M. West. Inside, a doll with its eyes gouged out, and a child's teeth strung on a wire. Locals muttered about a cult that once whispered to the voice in the pines. In 1991, a retired detective received a letter. No return address. Just a single line. I was Marjorie West once. But I don't remember being her. The postmark led him to a nursing home in New Jersey. An elderly woman sat by the window, clutching a daisy brooch. When he said Marjorie's name, she began to rock. They called me Mary, she murmured. But sometimes, I dream of a red ribbon. Then she turned her face to the wall, and never spoke again. The case was closed. The files yellowed with age. But in McKean County, the woods never forgot. Even now, if you stand very still at the edge of that meadow, you might hear it. Faint. Far away. A little girl's voice humming a hymn. And if you follow it, the humming stops. If you're still with me, get ready, because the next story is even more horrifying. August 23, 1912. Swayze Lake, Louisiana. The air hung thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting cypress. Percy Dunbar wiped sweat from his brow as he set down the picnic basket, watching his two sons, Bobby, just 4 years old, and his older brother, chase fireflies along the water's edge. Leslie Dunbar spread out a checkered blanket, humming softly. Bobby, don't go too far, she called. But Bobby was already wandering toward the reeds, his small hands brushing against the tall grass. Then a rustle, a whisper of wind. Leslie turned her head for just a second. When she looked back, Bobby was gone. No splash, no scream. Just the slow, dark water lapping at the shore. By nightfall, the entire town was searching. Men with lanterns waded through the swamp. Bloodhounds bayed, then fell silent, their noses pressed to the ground in confusion. Divers dragged the lake, pulling up nothing but silt and dead branches. Then a fisherman came forward, his voice trembling. Saw a man in a rowboat, had a boy with him. Boy was crying, but the man just stared. Then the fog rolled in and they was gone. Leslie began having dreams. In them Bobby called for her, but his voice was wrong. Too deep, too slow. And always just before she woke she heard something else. The sound of something crawling out of the water. 8 months later, a miracle, or a nightmare. A drifter named William Walters was arrested in Mississippi with a small, silent boy at his side. Walters claimed the child was Bruce Anderson, the son of a poor woman named Julia Anderson. But when the Dunbars saw him, Leslie collapsed to her knees. Bobby. Oh God, it's Bobby. The boy didn't react. He didn't know them. And when Julia Anderson arrived, weeping, reaching for him, the boy flinched. That's my son, Julia begged. Please. But the Dunbars had money, influence, and the town wanted it to be Bobby. So when the judge ruled in the Dunbars' favor, no one protested. Not even when the boy woke screaming every night, whispering, "They told me my name is Bobby now." The boy grew up as Bobby Dunbar. But he was wrong. Neighbors noticed. He never laughed. He avoided mirrors as if afraid of what looked back. Once, his teacher found him drawing the same picture over and over. A woman with no face. A boat. And beneath it, hands reaching up from the water. When asked, he only said, "That's where I was before." Years later, as a grown man, he stood at the edge of Swayze Lake, staring into the black water. His son asked what he was looking at. "Him," Bobby whispered. "The other one." After William Walters died in prison, a jailer found his journal. The last entry read, "Found the boy in a shack by the marsh. He was alone, but I heard voices. He kept saying things no child should know. Then he looked at me and smiled. They let me go," he said. "But they kept the other one." And then there were the dreams. Leslie's granddaughter claimed that, as a child, she saw a boy standing at the foot of her bed, dripping wet, his eyes black. He said, "Tell them I'm still here." In 2004, DNA proved the truth. The boy raised as Bobby Dunbar was not the Dunbar's son. He was likely Bruce Anderson. But the real Bobby? He was never found. Then in 2010, an old woman came forward with a letter. Her grandfather, a grave digger, had confessed on his deathbed. Buried a child's coffin in 12. No name on it. Just a little wooden cross. The letter ended with, "The boy who came back wasn't Bobby. But the swamp still has him." The case was closed. The truth was known. But in Opelousas they still tell stories. They say if you go to Swayze Lake at dusk when the mist rises, you might see two small ripples in the water. As if something is looking up at you. Waiting. Wondering why it was left behind. This has been The Boy Who Came Back Wrong. Sleep well. If you enjoyed these terrifying tales, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps keep the horror coming. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a chilling story.